It looked like this. Should I do announcements? Good morning again, Sangha, or afternoon actually, now that it's noon exactly. Just a reminder of some of our announcements here. Our novena prayers are tonight and every Thursday at 5:45, live streamed on YouTube. And of course, you can join us for those and send prayer requests for yourself and others, both living and deceased, to prayer, singular, at heartwoodrefuge.org. And also just a reminder that those are silently read, not shared publicly. We have our final Friday fun night this Friday at 6 o'clock. We will watch the movie Soul together virtually, followed by a discussion of how we see the Dharma reflected in it. And you can register for that on the Heartwood website on the retreat page. Also, save the date, because on March 8th at 9 a.m. Eastern, Heartwood will host the virtual 20th anniversary celebration of the Outstanding Women in Buddhism Awards. You can also register for that on our website. And also just, again, our mortgage year-end matching campaign has been extended through the end of March, thanks to our lenders. They've offered to extend that through the end of March. And retiring a portion of that mortgage will allow us to offer more Dharma-based retreats, expand our outreach through Engaged Buddhism, and renovate the 26 remaining units as dedicated housing to our community. You can also donate through Amazon Smile, selecting Heartwood as your selected charity. And a reminder also to please follow, like, and share Heartwood on social media. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the job.
Rachel and Shannon, if you can please get with Sister Suchness field, we can make sure that the other tablet is set up so that we can do all this from the other tablet. We should be able to use the document on that side, Zoom, the software, so that we don't have to see all of the.
I can run in 11 o'clock and work on that.
Please continue to do that. Yes. I'd like to say the song is there. How long this is going to take, whatever is going on here with the conversation. So hello, Sangha. If we could just do a sound check and I can maybe see a thumbs up if you're able to hear as Noble Paniwadi is still on her way over from the Hermitage. We do have, hi Brian, thank you. Nancy, thank you. We do have the contemplation, but I think we'll just wait a few more minutes to get started before she arrives. But also just wanted to check back in for those of you that are here for the first time on Tuesdays and Thursdays as we start to continue our 50 weeks of transformation. We had originally said that you needed to sign up on Zoom because we weren't going to do this on YouTube and Facebook. However, our last two conversations and dialogue that we have had, we feel that it's necessary to continue to share this with others, as this is it's a very original way in which we're approaching the Dharma, and we're sharing dialogue and conversation, especially how we're doing it here at Heartwood, and we think it's a great thing that we would like to continue to offer. So just want to let you know that we will try it out for a few more weeks, offering it as well on Facebook and YouTube. But we still do ask that you sign up on Zoom one time. You only need to register one time to the Tuesdays and Thursdays so that you can receive the emails, the communications, and also the text that we're studying and reading from. And let's see, last Thursday, I think we had did our breakouts, and we got to share from those that were in the room, and I'm sorry, that were on the Zoom, but not in the room. And we had asked those in the room to share and write down any notes. Maybe if there's any of you there that were facilitators or just want to share something from your group, we can do that as we wait for Venerable Taniwati to arrive. We'll just open up for dialogue. It sounds like I just heard a car door, but it looks like Rachel might have something to share, so I'll invite Rachel at this time to share about last week's group breakout.
Sure. Hello, everyone. And on the topic of dukkha, Aya in our group had stated that she notices that if she resists physical discomfort or sensory stimulus, that makes her suffering worse. So she addresses it by adopting a sense of humor towards her critic or abandoning the thought or feeling. She also stated that it's important to notice others and their responses to her actions or behavior, and to check in with them and be honest about herself. Sister Toka Tokum said her own mind causes suffering. Physical illness is also a challenge. She notices that if her view is more relaxed, she's more comfortable in her body. And her view being of things not as she wants them to be or I had mentioned my mind also causing suffering via the inner critic towards myself and others in situations. I try to address by noticing, examining, understanding, and then eventually softening towards myself and transforming to a more loving view as part of the practice. Venerable Taniwati said that we have a tendency to default to definitions, looking at examining why we struggle letting people find contentment in their own way. For example, with woo-woo, feeling that her woo-woo was better than other types of woo. That kind of is an example. And so we get stuck in a different way of creating excuses and take pride in dysfunction. In regards to abandoning wrong views, sometimes we cut the link in the wrong place and detach immediately after the sense consciousness contact. And that was my group.
We were the only one left from the groups that were together, so the both have arrived.
So thank you. I'm sorry we were late today. Honey Duke and I got into a discussion, and when we looked up, like, oh, we gotta go now. We are so late. It's amazing how when you can start from one little thread. It's like anybody who has a sweater that is knitted, you know what happens if you pull one little string. Before you know it, you've unraveled the sweater. But actually, ignorance is like that. And when you grab hold of one little string of ignorance and start pulling on it, you can unravel, the Buddha said, the whole mass of delusion. How wonderful to know that all you have to get is one little thread and just keep pulling on that thread, and it points you to another delusion, another delusion. And what we find out is that these delusions are not personal, they're delusions, but because we hold ourselves as the center of everything, then it becomes my delusion, or I think of it as your delusion. And so we personify or bring it to a personal domain, and then it becomes very difficult to uproot because that becomes part of our identification, who we think we are or how we think we are. If you want to get away and say, well, I'm no longer thinking in terms of who, like a person, how one thinks they are, or how one thinks one should be. And that makes it very difficult to unravel. Or if you wanted to think of it in the opposite way, it could be like a knot. And you know, when you're learning to tie a shoestring, you know, if the object is for the bow to not come untied, then we did really good before we learned how to really tie it, because we always ended up with a knot, you know, and so our parents have to loosen the knot. So we got really good at the shoestring not coming, not slipping loose, because we somehow had knotted it. So we can take everything from almost exact opposite sides, and we can come up with the same conclusion if we're not invested into it turning out in a certain way. So I'd like to encourage you as you go forward in this year of deepening in becoming the Dharma, to not be so invested in your to have opinions but not be so attached to them, to have an idea of what is truth but not to be so attached to that. And if we stay always in looking in the past, we will not be able to see what is right in front of us. And so the present in the future becomes the past. And we miss what is erroneous because we didn't catch it as it was unfolding, and it becomes a part of history. So that's the way it is, or that's the way it has rolled out. And there is an acceptance of it that is not really based on truth. And so we find ourselves in a dilemma, a conundrum. We find ourselves actually on dangerous territory because we have not realized the truth in something. Yes, there was an occurrence. Yes, it happened. But we have not actually seen the truth of things, so we walk away with a false impression. We walk away with a faulty view, a faulty opinion of what happened. And we can see right now, just in the world that we live in, or even in the society that we live in, that if one is not careful in the art of looking, then they will forget what they see. Their mind will wrap a story around it, and a lie becomes the truth, and the truth becomes a lie. And however I see it, that's the way it ends up being for me. And so I wanted to, glasses.
Can you please not use the mask?
Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes. But I need a pair of glasses. Somewhere.
Just visiting the teachers. Are there some in her mailbox, maybe?
Maybe a pair in the mailbox.
Glasses, so I don't have some here.
Oh, great, thank you for that. So I wanted to share something that is happening right now and ask you to not be offended because, and to try to not take it personally because it's not personal. When we formed Heartwood, we said it would, our mission statement would be to protect and to preserve and to transmit the full counsel of the Buddha Dharma, to protect and to preserve and to transmit. And in our process of trying to do that, sometimes we have bumped up against some new ways of holding and understanding the Dharma that are not that popular, maybe not that contemporary, maybe not that sensitive to our culture, the way Western people think, the way they have to, how you have to feed them something so that they can tolerate it, so they won't cut off and not listen. And that can have its place. Where did Honey Deepa go? Oh, you don't have to wear one right here in this seat.
You need a man?
No, he doesn't need one in this seat because he gotta talk. Could you please go back? And so we can get into a place that if the Dharma doesn't suit us or doesn't jive with how we think, then we reject. And it's okay to reject because we're all free agents. We can accept or we can reject something. But, you know, the purpose is not to make things palatable so that you can accept. He said, my Dharma is not for everybody. You know, he said, it's hard to see and it's hard to understand. So a person has to really be seeking and has to really be willing to step back from what they know and accept as true if they want to hear this. And you have to really be listening and willing to put it up against what you already know, how you already know what you know. And then shake it up and see what happens. So when he says, you know, to come see for yourself, and he says, don't accept it because, and we went through 9 different ways, you know, because the teacher said so, because I said so, because it's written in your sutras. He get all of those ways, but then he capped it off with, but activate it, act on it. And when you've done that, see what happens. And when you have activated it in your life, and then you see that this is worthy to be held on to or adopted, then adopt it. So he wasn't just saying, you know, or what would be the point? He wasn't just saying, well, you know, I'm throwing this out. I think it's pretty good. You may not think so. So if you don't, forget about it. He wasn't saying that exactly. He was saying that it may bump up against your sensitivities. It may bump up against how you do things or how you understand things. But if you will take it to heart and actually activate it, even when you feel that it's goes against the grain of your experience for you. He said, if you allow this to also become your experience, then you will know for yourself whether this is worthy to be kept and something else to be abandoned. So, so something has occurred in Buddha land. And I want to bring it up today, and I want to set a context for it, for our contemplation. And unfortunately, mostly it will be because most of you probably haven't heard of this, and I'm going to share with you what has happened today and how important it is to not overlook this in a personal, contemplative way, like looking and seeing how something in the way one holds the Dharma in their life, how they can fall prey to some unwholesomeness because a little leaven leavens the whole lump. Okay, so I have an opening statement. If you could put that up for them, sister, and if we could read that together, then we will start. You don't have to wear your mask, and when you want to say something, just start talking, and I'll stop because I enjoyed our conversation today around this. Okay, so can we read this together? The danger of Culturalizing Dharma. Can you make that bigger in case somebody, because I only hear two voices. The danger of culturalizing Dharma, how seemingly good intentions can destroy, how seemingly good intentions can destroy. The true teaching doesn't disappear as long as counterfeit of the true teaching hasn't appeared in the world. But when the counterfeit of the true teaching appears in the world, then the truth disappears. It's like true gold, which doesn't disappear as long as counterfeit gold hasn't appeared in the world. But when counterfeit gold appears in the world, then real gold disappears. In the same way, the true teaching doesn't disappear as long as the counterfeit of the true teaching hasn't appeared in the world. But when the counterfeit of the true teaching appears, then the true teaching disappears. Okay, so now that's really like a tongue twister, mouthful. So I want us to read it again and pay attention to the hases and the hasn't. And then it will actually settle in the mind a little bit better. So the title again, The Danger of Culturalizing Dharma, or How Seemingly Good Intentions Can Destroy. The true teaching doesn't appear as long as the counterfeit of the true teaching hasn't appeared in the world. But when the counterfeit of the true teaching appears in the world, then the truth disappears. It's like true gold, which doesn't disappear as long as counterfeit gold hasn't appeared in the world. But when counterfeit gold appears in the world, then real gold disappears. In the same way, the true teaching doesn't disappear as long as the counterfeit of the true teaching hasn't appeared in the world. But when the counterfeit of the true teaching appears in the world, then the true teaching disappears. So there's something that has happened. There is only one ancient sutta or book, collection in the Theravada tradition, and it's the poems of the early Buddhist nuns speaking of their enlightenment. So if you go through all of the canon, it's very rare. Maybe you can count it on 5 hands that a nun has said something and that has been noted or counted as praiseworthy. We basically don't appear, even though the Buddha said something, and even though there was awakening for women, their voices, their stories, their works are generally not recorded. So it just became a really male-dominated exposition of all that occurred throughout the life of the Buddha and his disciples, and we were an inconvenient truth. But there is one collection of 73 bhikkhunis' testimony of their enlightenment. And in some of these, they would speak of, a lot of them were married and their spouse became a monk and attained enlightenment. And later, they became disciples of the Buddha, and they also attained. And they would express their attainment or their enlightenment. First, they would speak of the enlightenment of their husband, their former husband, whatever, and say, in the same way, and then would speak of their enlightenment. So it was important, because of the controversy that occurred 2,500 years ago about whether women had the potential, even the right to pursue spiritual matters and could have any attainment. And the Buddha said, yes, they can, but because there's such a mindset, it'll just create just a world of trouble if I bring them into the Sangha. Not because they can't attain, but because you can't accept their attainment, their attaining. And it's not a lot different than it is today, 2,500 years later. But there's this one special book, this collection of testimonies, the songs of the Terries, it's called the Therigatha, Songs of the Terries, in which they express. Now, something has happened that book was translated by someone. And in translating, he actually rewrote the book. So he's a aspiring, budding poet. And if anybody knows anything about poetry books, it's very rare to find a publisher for your first book of poetry. No, it's a hard field to emerge in with a bestseller on your first book of poetry. But the publisher held him out to be, and he didn't openly and honestly disagree or deny that he wasn't qualified to be a translator. And he wrote a book of poems inspired by their stories. And later he said, well, I read what they said, what these enlightened bhikkhunis were trying to express. And I gave you a more perfect version. Yeah. So that's what happened. And the book hit was widely promoted by Shambhala, and it hit the circuit, all of their marketing and what they had to say about it, and people who don't speak Pali, are not Pali scholars who don't know or understand Pali, as they begin to read this book, they liked it very, very much. And in a year, it just spread worldwide. At the Library of Congress, it is categorized as a translation. Now, translation versus a creative literary work are two very different things. One acts as or speaks from an authoritative position of translating it from one language into another language, keeping in mind the meaning and the phrasing, that one can have a better understanding through the translation. And a literary work is something you come up with and you write about, or a fictional one. So this book got out there. I mean, it hit the world by storm, or at least the Western world, mostly through the vehicle of Vipassana. And one of the Theravada bhikkhunis, Sudama in South Carolina, wrote a critique of it and said, this is not what the Pali says at all. There's no mention of the Buddha in the book at all. There's no mention of any of the Buddha's doctrines, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, there's no Dharma in the book. There is no translation of the stories or their enlightenment experience. There is nothing in it that connects it with the enlightenment the Buddha was talking about. So then you say, well, then why did anybody think this was a great book? Well, it was because it gave us things to think about around the things we like to think about. But not from the perspective of Dharma, but from our ordinary ways of seeing and hearing and thinking and understanding. And it became the topic of book study, women's book studies all over the world, and on and on and on, you know, because it fit our mode of conversating and investigating from our own cultural perspectives and biases. Everybody still with me? If you're still with me, nod your head. Yes, you're still with me. Okay. Now, since that time, since it was brought up, and those who are Pali scholars read it and began to comment on it, there's a whole big brouhaha about it. And what they're saying is because it's so widely disseminated now, the Library of Congress has it categorized as a translation, not a creative work, based on a translation of something. That it's almost like the horse is out the gate and you can't put him back in. So for perhaps millions of people, their voices of the Enlightenment experience by which we could have gained both insight and inspiration will be lost. And it's curious, it's interesting that he said when confronted, well, what I actually did was I read their stories, what these nuns were trying to express, these enlightened nuns, what they were trying to express. I mansplained for you. Me, my gee, wow. How something, because some people say, well, what's the big deal about it? Okay, so you wrote a book, you don't like it, don't buy it. You don't like it, and you already bought it, don't read it. You know, give it to somebody else. It may help somebody else or whatever. And can I understand what, why there's such an, dare I use the word outrage? Failed to see what's so wrong about what has transpired. And it has taken a lot of explaining for people to understand the seriousness of it. The Buddha said it in that paragraph that we read. He just said, when the true is in the world, it will remain in the world until the counterfeit comes in. And when the counterfeit comes in, then it will destroy the truth. That's why it's important. Because the counterfeit then starts to be taken as the truth, and the truth is lost. And it doesn't matter if you have 100 people or 100 groups and 95 of them seize upon and legitimize the counterfeit, and only 5 hold to the truth. Better to be in the minority that holds to the truth than the 95 that went the way of the counterfeit. Now, the thing about counterfeit is that in the beginning, nothing is 100% counterfeit. They use something, like some of the fabricing, to create something that is part of what's used in what's real, or a little bit of the gold dust to create some of the counterfeit coins. Or, there's some part of it. I mean, if it was like so totally obviously counterfeit, then a person would look up fake, But when it has like the smell, or a little bit of the taste, or a little bit of the view of, it gets to be difficult, can be difficult to know what is the counterfeit. And as long as something is started, it's like that little string that you start to pull, and before you look at it, half of the sweater is unwrapped. May even be no longer fit to wear unless it's in the back where you can camouflage it with a jacket. And that's how we can take things in a worldly sense and understand some spiritual principles. Doesn't always have to come from the mystic. The Buddha said we can look all around us and just look at the very things that we delight in and we grasp around and that we draw our understanding from. And you can put that over in this category and you can see and you can know and you can understand something. If you don't get anything today, I hope you get this. And so because he said, well, I decided that I would take the writings, the poems, and make them a bit more accessible. But then it got way wider than that. How wide? Some of the poems are wider than others and depart more from the text. Some are fairly close to what was originally written and some are not. But that's a whole other discussion. That's as clear as I go. This is him justifying when he's now being challenged. So he says, well, they said, well, could you give us an example of a line or a couple of lines, what a literal translation would be like, as an example of how you did it? He said, well, I mean, it gets even wider than that, really. Yeah, I mean, luckily I had no idea what I was doing. So it just kind of allowed me to just make it up as I went along. And I spent a long time doing it and a long time editing them. Some of these poems I rewrote, 100, 150 times or more. So it was kind of always just this seeing what it was for me. That was the important part. And then trying to kind of let that come through, how much of it was me and how much of it was the original and something in between. So it went on. It said that I started thinking I would just have the not knowing mind. Now, if you're translating something because you want to what? Know what it says. And he said I was resting in the not knowing mind. So I listened to their stories and it was almost like I was channeling them and they came to me and what I have presented to you is a better understanding of what those enlightened nuns were trying to express. An example would be Here's a translation from the Matika Sutta, Terry. Though in pain and feeble, my youth long gone, I climbed the mountain, leaning on a staff, and having laid down my outer robe and overturned my bowl, my mind was free. I've attained the three knowledges and fulfilled the Buddha's instruction. His translation was, at the top of the mountain, I spread my outer robe where perhaps my older sister, who once passed this way, spread hers. I set down my bowl, and there was her staff, the twin of my own. Using both staffs, I lowered myself down and leaned back against a large gray rock. I let go of the staffs, and my hand was empty. The mountain went on holding me. Then it let me go. My staff, I now also leave behind, just in case you're ever passing this way. Two entirely different accounts of what transpired. What's left out is even more important. The markers of her experience of enlightenment itself. The teachings are left unmentioned, the Buddha's teachings that she spoke of, that she had penetrated. There's no clear mention of awakening, of enlightenment. There's no Buddha Dharma, no Buddha, nothing. And every poem is this way. And yet, that is the testimony of the 73 enlightened bhikkhus. But why that was so enticing, and why this book was so easily grasped. Forget about the mansplaining, like she had the enlightenment experience, and I have to tell you what that means because she's not capable of expressing it herself, That's one part of it. But that's a lesser part. That's the whole mansplaining thing, our notion that was okay. But the greater danger is that the teaching that is apparent in it, for one who is on the path approaching awakening, that is completely lost. Now, one day when we can really spend more than an hour, I'd like to share with you a very well put together, very scholarly article and exploration about mindfulness versus the spiritual path to awakening. And that's going to take time to lay a really good foundation for you. But the reason that this kind of thing could occur is because so much of the Buddha's foundation for his Dharma and the platform and the premise by which one awakens has been left out of the Western teaching. I gave a Dharma talk this past week, and I based it on a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya in the Middle Age discourses. And I asked how many had even heard of the book, of the Pali Canon. And I asked them to put their hand up so I could see. So I was looking and I couldn't really see. I said, can you put your hand way up so I can really see? And I don't recall seeing one hand, although I'm sure at least one has, because my invitation to teach came through her. So that means if she's connected with me, then she's heard of whether she bought the book or not. Maybe I asked how many had the book. Maybe that was it. Maybe they heard of the book. I think I asked how many actually had it. I didn't ask how many had books from, I don't have to mention all the contemporary teachers, because I know library shelves are full of them. But I asked, and not one hand went up. So, I wanted to say that because we have entered a very useful segment of the Buddha's training, but we've left it alone and isolated apart from the very foundational things that must be there for it to be built upon. We've come away with a sort of culturalized understanding of Buddhism, one that fits our sensibilities and our way of looking and approaching the world a little better. One that's more digestible, one that makes me feel better about myself, one that leaves me in the center of my world, although I can talk in terms and use words that make it appear like I'm not there, you know. And all of that is good from a psychological perspective for being healthy people functioning in the world, but doesn't have a lot to do with enlightenment, with awakening, spiritual awakening. Well, it does have a lot to do with it, but it's sitting in the wrong place. It took a seat at the front of the table. It's like having Thanksgiving turkey dinner and putting the cranberry sauce in the middle of the table. The cranberry sauce tastes good, yeah, but it's not the central thing. And if it is made the central thing, then everything gets a little bit out of whack, or at least creates obstacles and pitfalls. So one thing has been the great connection of mindfulness, simply as a process of bare awareness. So we have people come all the time and meditating, you know, they're doing their bare awareness thing. Or you know, this it leads easily to the misconception that the cultivation of mindfulness has nothing to do with the ethics that the Buddha said one must have before they can successfully do any kind of mindfulness in meditation. And the wholesome states of mind that must be cultivated that bring the clarity for you to be able to see things as they actually are. It misplaces or our attention and where the attention must be placed. That's why it's a longer conversation than we can have today. We'd have to have maybe an all-day workshop so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you put it in its proper place so that you can move on to the cultivation of spiritual awakening. That's what I'm saying. And what it does is it makes good people, the second part of the title of our looking today was, what was it? Can somebody tell me what I said? How, sister, you know I'm gonna have it.
Such as how that is also in the chat.
Okay, can you read it to me?
How seemingly good intentions can destroy.
The danger of culturalizing Dharma, or how seemingly good intentions can destroy. So you see, if we don't have the right foundation, if we don't have the right balance, we don't have the right understanding of what the Buddha expressed, we go around with our good intentions, you know, because we are good people, destroying stuff all over the place because we haven't understood how to understand things. So we think we're doing a good thing or doing a good work. We're being a help. We're being, you know, because we have not understood the right way to do something, to implement something, the right way to think about something. And so we end up supporting what is unwholesome as opposed to what is wholesome because of our ignorance of how to view wholesomeness. And we see that throughout, you know, in our sanghas, and that's why we have so many issues in our sanghas, and confusion in our sanghas, and inability to see things clearly in our sanghas, because we have an element of the counterfeit that is destroying that which is authentic and genuine. And it's why I encourage you, it's fine to read contemporary books and to listen to contemporary views, mine included. But don't just take that as the Buddha's teaching. Go back to the earliest translations. You know, I used to think there was such a difference between the Theravada view and the Mahayana and Vajrayana view. But the more you put them beside each other, the more you see they're not that far apart. It's our westernized view of what the Dharma is versus the traditional view or understanding of what the Dharma is. That's where the gap is, and the gap is growing. And yes, some of us will write wonderful books with our poetry and our thoughts and our musings, but don't mistake it for Dharma. And don't hail it as Dharma. And don't let it replace Dharma in your life. And there's a lot more to the story, and we don't have to go into that because I just wanted to stay focused on that which is authentic and that which is counterfeit, because they have two different sparks. I got a copy of the book. I got copies from several sources because everybody was like, "Oh, look, sister, there's a book on the, you know, the Songs of the Terrace, a new contemporary, you know, translation." And as I read them, they were like flat to me. I tried a second time. The first one like just didn't hit me. The second one just didn't hit me. I said, I'll try one more. I tried a third one, it just didn't hit me. I just put the book up. But I had planned to do a whole study on the book because that's what they were encouraging. You know, because we're in the age of the rising of the feminine principle. You know, and so there was the whole thing, but I couldn't do it because there was no life in it for me. I'm so glad. I was thinking like, what's wrong with Panyawadi? You know, why can't she get with the program? You know, but now I'm so happy because it bore something out for me. The readings had no life in them. There was no quickening because I am on the path. And I didn't find the gold. You know, I talk about walking on the path, you know, the dusty path, dust gets on your shoes. If it's a golden path, then you'll have speckles of gold that get on your shoes. There was nothing on my shoes walking with that. So I left it. I just left it alone. But then it turns out that while he was writing this, he stayed at a nunnery. And he asked the sisters to read what he was writing. They're not poly scholars or whatever, and they're not holding themselves out to be translators. He's holding himself out for that. Or in the beginning until that all got debunked. And he says, well, actually, he really then tried to dump it on them. Well, I had them reading this and they would say, oh, don't use that word. I don't think that's what they were expressing. You know, try something else. But by the time he finished, it's like, well, you know, like they were the authorities. He like just kicked them right under the bus. But when the book came out, they were just a thank you to the many nuns and women who read this before it was published. His name was on it. That's why, you know, the whole issue is addressed to him and to the publisher who has a responsibility to qualify the translator. But I'm sad that this went forth in this way. Because now it's hard to get it back out from the translation literary domain. And even if it does get out, millions of copies have been sold already, and millions of people will put that on their shelf and pass it down to generations. So I just want to ask us to be careful. It's good to share our views and talk things out. But also try to stay as true to the Dharma as you can for the sake of living beings. I've been getting articles from everywhere. I remember when, I get a lot of books from my associates in Buddha land. And they're like, honey, why would you write something, But I never do. I haven't once. I think I've gotten asked 20 or 30 times. Because for me to write that means I'd have to do a really deep investigation, of the Dharma, and I really don't have the time for that, to tell you the truth. But I want to be very careful about the words I put into the Buddha's mouth. I want to be very careful about what I leave for future generations. And I think that this gentleman really had a good intention, but just not having a deep enough immersion in the Dharma, that what seems business as usual in our culture could really rub against the grain of the kind of integrity that is proposed, supposed, and possible for Dharma followers. So and then he said, once it got out there, he says, I realized that some people were gonna have an issue with it. So it wasn't like he didn't know and like, oh, I'm so surprised. It was like, but he made choices every step of the way and went with it. And he said, and I'm okay with it. And I was okay with it. I think that was before it hit the fan like this. Now I'm pretty sure he's not okay with the outcome. But in the beginning, he was flying off the shelf like hot cakes, being unchallenged towards authenticity. So sometimes we can cause a lot of damage as we pass through. And I don't want anyone to have regrets. And yes, a lot of what we read this historical, some of it has been taken out of context, and some of it just couldn't possibly be true because it so flies in the face of the Buddhist comment, other 99 out of 100 comments on the same topic. So yes, there will be error that comes into the world. I just don't want it to be me. And I hope that more sanghas. I know what people want to hear. I know what time we're living in. You can go on any corner that has something Buddhist, and you can find almost the same thing there. And it would be so easy, so persuasive. To be more accommodating so that maybe somebody can hear and then maybe they can take it deeper. But sometimes once something is in you, to go deeper, you're like vector off. So you think you're going deep, but it's on a slide. So you don't go as deep as you think you're going. You may be going deeper than the other ones who came the same way that you came. But you're not actually going deeper because it's hard to deconstruct something that has been constructed and now is a part of you and that informs your inquiry. I believe that it is possible to awaken in this very life. I believe it is possible to be accosted by the truth if I have no need to hold to what is false, to preserve a faulty identification and ego view, ego clinging. I I don't think it's even that far off, except we're so far off. And we might have to dismantle the whole thing as we've understood it and start again. Not from our Western perspective. And it's hard to use the word Western because then we think of Eastern perspective. But I'm thinking about more about from our mundane views, putting what he himself calls supra mundane and trying to filter them through our mundane and our particular cultural views. That's not a way that one comes to the Dharma. But that was the way that was offered. Someone told me, I went wide upon you. It's your responsibility. You know, the later teachers who came, like me and whoever else, it's y'all's responsibility to take them deep. But it's hard to go deep when the foundation that went wide was so alluring and accommodating that one fails to grasp what is true. I felt that it was important to have this conversation today because we really think we have our hands on something good. And in fact, we do. But we should know where the sticky points are. And we should be willing to really look at them. One scholar said, and I think I'll stop talking and hope we have a little while if someone wants to say something. It all depends on our view and intention with regard to meditation. Over the past century, Buddhism has been undergoing a kind of Protestant Reformation. With the decline of monasticism and the increased popularity of meditation among lay Buddhists, it's wonderful that so many people nowadays are incorporating meditation into their daily lives, but it is important not to overlook the value of devoting years to the study and practice as one's sole vocation. After all, we would not entrust our teeth to someone who had simply taken a number of dentistry workshops and practiced for an hour or so a day. So shouldn't we be even more careful about entrusting our minds to meditation instructors without years of professional training in the theory and practice of meditation? It depends on our view and our intention. If what we really want is a kind of meditative therapy to help us relieve stress, work through personal psychological problems, and lead a more balanced life, we don't need highly trained meditation teachers. But insofar as we set our goals higher to liberation from the cycle of existence and the realization of enlightenment, then we need to rely on those who have been trained for years in the theory of and the practice of meditation and who have the corresponding attainments. Traditionally, monastics have played a crucial role in this regard, and I hope they will continue to do so in the future. But for that to happen, they need to be supported as they have in the past. If we only had part-time scientists, then no branch of science would have progressed to its current level of sophistication. Likewise, if we only have had part-time doctors and psychotherapists, we would be perhaps worse off with respect to our physical and mental health care. So imagine the world with only part-time mechanics or electricians or farmers. The path to spiritual awakening is the most challenging of all human endeavors and entails the deepest transformation of a human being from a deluded, miserable creature to an enlightened sage. And if we wish to produce enlightened teachers in modern society, then individuals who wholeheartedly wish to devote themselves to this path, whether or not they want to take monastic ordination, should be given all possible support. And this would be our greatest gift to future generations. So we don't always have to look to the past. We can look to the present if we don't close our eyes, if we don't ask the tough questions. This is not about judging anyone. It's not about a person. It's a how ignorance and that which borders on deceit, deceit and definitely conceit can destroy. So, the floor is open. If anybody would like. I did these the whole time. I thought I would. I know we're very somber today. If you want to, you could just Google a Buddhist literary scandal, the curious case of the first free women. A Buddhist literary scandal, the curious case of the first free women by Bhante Akaliko. Or you could just drop in any number of words because it's all over the internet. But this was this particular article I thought was the most comprehensive and brought out in such a very intelligent way the dangers. That's all we want to look at, the dangers, so that we ourselves make sure we don't fall into a similar trap. And I think it'll give us more respect for not only the Dharma, but for the path. Some of us have not given that proper respect for the path. We've brought it down to a level of usefulness for us to be okay with whatever we're dealing with, whatever it is. My husband left me, my child got locked up, I'm stressed out at work, I don't like this job anymore, like all of those kinds of things. And it can be helpful for that, but it's way much more. And someone needs to be standard bearer so that the Dharma will remain, whatever little bit of it is left. And that when you come to Heartwood, preserving the Buddha Dharma for future generations is why we are here. So if you come for any other reason, wrong reason, if you don't want to learn the Dharma not as a Band-Aid, But as a cure, then we won't be of much use to you. Thank you for coming today. So if you want to send some comments, but you don't want them to be out there public, paniwadi2@yahoo.com is my email. You can send them, and me and plenty of people will definitely read them. Okay.